Volume-3, Chapter-11. What transport to retrace our early place, our easy bliss when each thing joy supplied. The woods, the mountains, and the wobbling maze of the wild brooks. Thompson. Belinche's slumbers continued till long after the hour which she had so impatiently anticipated for her woman, fatigued with travelling, did not call her till breakfast was nearly ready. Her disappointment, however, was instantly forgotten when, on opening the casement, she saw on one hand the white sea sparkling in the morning rays with its stealing sails and glancing oars, and on the other hand the fresh woods, the plains far stretching, and the blue mountain all glowing with the splendor of day. As she inspired the pure breeze, health spread a deeper blush upon her countenance, and pleasure danced in her eyes. Who could first invent convents? Said she. And who could first persuade people to go into them, and to make religion a pretense to which all that should inspire it? It's so carefully set out. God is best pleased with the homage of a grateful heart, and when we view His glories, we feel most grateful. I never felt so much devotion during the many dull years I was the convent, as I have done in the few hours that I have been here, where I need only look on all around me. I adore God in my inmost heart. Saying this, she left the window, bounded along the gallery, and in the next moment was in the breakfast room, where the Count was already seated. The cheerfulness of the bright sunshine had dispersed the melancholy glooms of his reflection. A pleasant smile was on his countenance, and he spoke in an enlivening voice to Belinche, whose heart echoed back the tones. Henry, and soon after the Countess with Mademoiselle Bain appeared, and the whole party seemed to acknowledge the influence of the scene. Even the Countess was so much reanimated as to receive the civilities of her husband with complacency, and but once forgot her good humor, which was when she asked whether they had any neighbors who were likely to make this barbarous spot more tolerable, and whether the Count believed it possible for her to exist here without some amusement. Soon after breakfast, the party dispersed, the Count ordering his steward to attend him in the library, went to survey the condition of his premises and to visit some of his tenants. Henry hastened with alacrity to the shore to examine a boat that was to bear them on a little voyage in the evening and to superintended the adjustment of a silk awning, while the Countess, attended by Mademoiselle Byrne, retired to an apartment on the modern side of the chateau, which was fitted up with airy elegance, and as the windows opened upon balconies that fronted the sea, she was there saved from a view of the horrid Pyrenees. Here, while she reclined on a sofa and casting her languid eyes over the ocean, which appeared beyond the wood tops, indulged in the luxuries of ennui, her companion read aloud a sentimental novel on some fashionable system of philosophy, for the Countess was herself somewhat of a philosopher, especially as to infinity, and among a certain circle her opinions were waited for with impatience and received as doctrine. The Lady Blanche meanwhile hastened to indulge amidst the wildwood walks around the chateau her new enthusiasm, where as she wandered under the shades, her gay spirits gradually yielded to patience complacency. How? Now she moved with solemn steps beneath the gloom of thickly interwoven branches, where the fresh dew still hung upon every flower that peeped along the grass, and now tripped sportively along the path on which the sunbeams darted, and the checkered foliage trembled where the tender green of the beech, the acacia, and the mountain ash, mingling with the solemn tint of the cedar, the pine, and cypress, exhibited as fine a contrast of coloring as the majestic oaks and oriental plane did not form to the filthy lightness of the crook tree and the waving grace of the poplar. Having reached a rustic seat within a deep recess of the woods, she rested a while, and as her eyes caught through a distant opening a glimpse of the blue waters of the Mediterranean, with the white sail gliding on its bosom, or of the broad mountain glowing beneath the midday sun, her mind experienced somewhat of that exquisite delight which awakened the fancy and leads to poetry. The hum of bees alone broke the stillness around her. As with other insects of various hues, they spotted gaily in the shade or sipped sweets from the fresh flowers. And while Blanche was a butterfly, fleeting from bird to bird, she indulged herself in the imagining the pleasures of its short day till she had composed the following stanza. The butterfly to his love. What bowery tell with fragrant breath couldst thee to stay thy airy flight, nor seek again the purple height, so oft the scene of gay delight. Long I have watched in the lily's bell, whose whiteness stole the morning's beam. No fluttering sound thy coming tell, no waving wings at distance gleam. But fountain fresh, nor breathing grove, nor sunny mead, nor blossom tree, so sweet as lilies shall prove the bower of constant love and me. When April birds begin to blow, the primrose and the harebell blue, that on the verdant moss bank grow, with violent cup that weep in dew. When wanton gales breathe through the shade, and shake the blooms, and steal their sweets, and swell the song of every glade, I range the forest's green retreats. There through the tangled wood walks play, where no rude urchin paces near, where spurely peeps the sultry day, and light dews fasten all the air. High on the sunbeam oft I sport over bower and fountain, vale and hill, often every blossoming floweret coat that hangs its head over winding rill. But these I will leave to be thy guide, and show thee where jasmine spreads her snowy leaf, where mayflowers hide, and rosebud rear their peepling heads. With me the mountains submit, scale, and taste the wild time's honeyed bloom. Those fragrance floating on the gale oft leads me to the cedar's gloom. Yet no sound come in the breeze. What shade thus dares to tempt thy stay? Once me alone thou wist to please, and with me only thou wouldst stray. But while thy long delay I mourn, and chide the sweet shades for their guile, thou mayst be true, and they forlorn. The fairy favors court thy smile, the tiny queen of fairy land, who knows thy speed, hath sent thee far. So bring, or ere the night watch stand, rich a sense for her shadowy calm. Perchance her acorn cup to fill with nectar from the Indian rose, or gather near some haunted rill. May dew that lull to sleep love's woes, or over the mountains bade thee fly, to tell her fairy love to speed when evening steals upon the sky, to dance along the twilight mead. But now I see thee sailing low, gay as the brightest flowers of spring, thy coat of blue and jet I know, and well thy gold and purple wings. Borne on the gale thou comest to me. Oh, welcome, welcome to my home. In Lily's cell we will live in glee, together over the mountains roam. When Lady Belench returned to the chateau, instead of going to the apartment of the Countess, she amused herself with wandering over that part of edifice which she had not yet examined, of which the most ancient first attracted her curiosity. For though what she had seen of the modern with gay and elegant, there was something in the former more interesting to her imagination. Having passed up the great staircase and through the oak gallery, she entered upon a long suite of chambers whose walls were either hung with tapestry or wainscoted with cedar, the furniture of which looked almost as antique as the rooms themselves. The spacious fireplaces where no mark of social cheer remained presented an image of cold desolation, and the whole suite had so much the air of neglected and desertion that it seemed as if the vulnerable person whose portrait hung upon the wall had been the last to inhabit them. On leaving this room, she found herself in another gallery, one end of which was terminated by back staircase and the other by a door that seemed to communicate with the north side of the chateau, but which being fastened, she descended the staircase, and opening a door in the wall a few steps down, found herself in a small square room that formed part of the west turret of the castle. 3 windows presented each a separate and beautiful prospect, that to the north overlooking Languedoc, another to the west, the hills ascending toward the Pyrenees, whose awful summit crowded the landscape, and a third, fronting the south, gave the Mediterranean and a part of the wild shore of Roussillon to the eye. Having left the turret and descended the narrow staircase, she found herself in a dusky passage where she wandered, unable to find her way, till impatience yielded to apprehension and she called for assistance. Presently, steps approached and light gleamed through a door at the other extremity of the passage, which was opened with caution by some person who did not venture beyond it, and whom Belinch observed in silence till the door was closing, when she called aloud and hastening towards it, perceived the old housekeeper. "Dear Mamsley, is it you?" said Dorothy. "How could you find your way hither?" Had Belinch been less occupied by her own fears, she would probably have observed the strong expressions of terror and surprise of Dorothy's countenance, who now led her through a long succession of passages and rooms that looked as if they had been uninhabited for a century, till they reached that appropriated to the housekeeper where Dorothy intended she would sit down and take refreshment. Belinch accepted the sweetmeats offered to her, mentioned her discovery of the pleasant turret, and her wish to appropriate it to her own use, whether Dorothy's taste was not so sensible to the beauties of landscape as her young lady's, or that the constant view of lovely scenery had deadened it. She forbore to praise the subject of Belinch's enthusiasm, which, however, her silence did not repress, to Lady Belinch's inquiry of whether the door she had found fastened at the end of the gallery late. She replied that it opened to a suite of room which had not been entered during many years. For, added she, my late lady died in one of them, and I could never find in my heart to go into them since. Belinch, though she wished to see these chambers, forbore, on observing that Dorothy's eyes were filled with tears, to ask her to unlock them, and soon after went to dress for dinner, at which the whole party meet in good spirits and good humour, except the Countess, who, vacant mind, overcome by the languor of idleness, whether neither suffer her to happy herself or to contribute to the happiness of others. Mademoiselle Byrne, attempting to be witty, directed her badinage against Henry, who answered, because he could not well avoid it, rather than from any inclination to notice her, whose liveliness sometimes amused, but whose conquest and insensibility often disgusted him. The cheerfulness with which Belinge rejoined the party vanished on her reaching the margin of the sea. She gazed with apprehension upon the immense expanse of waters, which at a distance she had beheld only with delight and astonishment, and it was by a strong effort that she so far overcame her fear as to follow her father into the boat, as she silently surveyed the vast horizon bending round the distant verge of the ocean. An emotion of sublimest rapture struggled to overcome a sense of personal danger. A light breeze played on the water and on the silk awning of the boat, and waved the foliage of the receding wood that crowned the cliffs for many miles, and which the Count surveyed with the pride of consciousness, property, as well as with the eye of taste. At some distance among these woods stood a pavilion, which had once been the scene of social gaiety, and which its situation still made one of romantic beauty. Thither the Count had ordered coffee and other refreshment to be carried, and thither the sailors now stayed, their course following the winding of the shore round many a woody promontory and circling bay, while the pensive tone of horns and other wind instrument played by the attendants in the distant boat echoed among the rocks and died along the waves. Belinge had now subdued her fears. A delightful tranquillity stole over her mind and held her in the silence, and she was too happy even to remember the convent or her former sorrows as subjects of comparison with her present felicity. The Countess felt less unhappy than she had done since the moment of her leaving Paris, for her mind was now under some degree of restraint. She feared to indulge its weird humours, and even wished to recover the court's good opinion on his family and on the surrounding scene. He looked with tempered pleasure and benevolent satisfaction, while his son exhibited the gay spirit of youth, anticipating new delights and regretless of thought of that were past. After near an hour's rowing, the party landed and ascended a little path overgrown with vegetation at a little distance from the point of the eminence. Within the shadowy recess of the wood appeared the pavilion, which Melange perceived as she caught a glimpse of its portico between the trees, to be built of variegated marble. As she followed the Countess, she often turned her eyes with rapture toward the ocean, seen beneath the dark foliage far below, and from thence upon the deep wood, whose silence and impenetrable gloom awakened emotions more solemn, but scarcely less delightful. The pavilion had been prepared as far as was possible on the very short notice for the reception of its visitors, but the faded colors of its painted walls and ceilings, and the decayed drapery of its once magnificent furniture declared how long it had been neglected and abandoned to the empire of changing season, while the party partook of the collation of fruit and coffee. The horns placed in the distant part of the wood where an echo sweetened and prolonged their melancholy tones, broke softly on the stillness of the scene. This spot seemed to attract even the administration of the countess, or perhaps it was merely the pleasure of planning furniture and decorations that made her dwell so long on the necessity of repairing and adoring it, while the Count never happier than when she had her mind engaged by natural and simple object, acquainted in all her design concerning the pavilion. The paintings on the walls and curved ceiling were to be renewed. The canopies and sofas were to be light green damask marble statues of wood nymph, bearing on their head basket of living flowers, were to adorn their recess between the windows, and descending to the ground were to admit to every part of the room, and it was of octagonal form, the various landscape. On one window opened upon the romantic glade, where the eye roved along the woody recesses, and the scene was bound only by the length pomp of groves. From another, to wood receding, disclosed the distant summit of the Pyres. The third fronted an avenue beyond which the grew towers of Chateau-le-Blanc and a picturesque part of its ruin were seen particularly among the foliage, while a fourth gave between the trees a glimpse of the green pasture and villages that diversely the bank of the Allude, the Mediterranean, with the bold cliff that overlooked its shore, were the grand objects of the 50 window, and the other gave, in different points of view, the wild scenery of the woods. After wandering for some time in these, the party returned to the shore and embarked, and the beauty of the evening tempting them to extend their excursion, they proceeded further up the bay. A dead calm had succeeded the light breeze that wafted them hither, and the men took to their oars. Around the waters were spread into one vast expanse of polished mirror, reflecting the grey cliffs and firdy wood that overhung its surface, the glow of the western horizon, and the dark clouds that came slowly from the east. Belinch loved to see the dipping oars imprinting the water and to watch the spreading circles they left, while gave a tremulous motion to the reflected landscape without destroying the harmony of its features. Above the darkness of the woods, her eye now catch a cluster of high towers, touched with the splendor of the setting rays, and soon after, the horns being then silent, she heard the faint swell of choral voices from the distance. "What voices are those upon the air?" said the Count, looking round and listening, but the strain had ceased. It seemed to be a whisper hymn, which I have often heard in my convent, said Belinch. "We are near to the monastery," then observed the Count, and the boat soon after doubling a lofty headland, the monastery of St. Clare appeared seated near the margin of the sea, where the cliffs suddenly sinking formed a low shore within a small bay, almost encircled with gate and Gothic windows of the hall, the cloister, and the side of the chapel more remote, while a vulnerable arch, which had once laid to the part of the fabric now demolished, stood a majestic ruin detached from the main building, beyond which appeared a grand perspective of the wood. On the grey walls the moss had fastened, and round the pointed shadows of the chapel, the ivy and the balcony hung in the many of fantastic red, all without a small silent and forsaken. But while Blanche gazed with admiration on this vulnerable pile, while those effect was heightened by the strong lights and shadows thrown athwart it by the cloudy sunset, a sound of many voices slowly chanting arose from within. The Count bade his men rest on their oars. The monks were singing the hymn of vespers, and some female voices mingled with the strain, which rose by soft degrees till the high organ of the choral sound swelled into full and shining harmony. The strain soon after dropped into sudden silence, and was renewed in the low and still more solemn key, till at length the holy chorus died away, and was heard no more. Melange sighed. Tears trembled in her eyes, and her thoughts seemed wafted with the sounds to heaven, while a rapt stillness prevailed in the boat. A train of our friars, and then the nuns, veiled in white, issued from the cloister and passed under the shade of wood to the main body of the edifice. The Countess was the first of her party to awaken from this pause of silence. This dismal hymn and fairies make one quite melancholy, said she. Twilight is coming on. Pray let us return, or it will be dark before we get home. The Count, looking up now, perceived that the twilight of evening was anticipated by an approaching storm. In the east a tempest was collecting. A heavy gloom came on, opposing and contrasting the glowing splendor of the setting sun. The clamorous sea fowl skimmed in fleet circles upon the surface of the sea, dipping their light pennon in the wave as they fled away in search of shelter. The boatmen pulled hard at their oars, but the thunder that now murmured at the distance and the heavy drop that began to dimple the water made the Count determined to put back to the monastery for shelter, and the course of the boat was immediately changed. As the clouds approached to the west, their lurid darkness changed to the deep ruddy glow, which by reflection seemed to fire the top of the wood and shattered tower of the monastery. The appearances of the heavens alarmed the Countess of Mademoiselle, whose expressions of apprehension distressed the Count and perplexed his men, while Blanche continued silent, now agitated with fear, and now with admiration, as she viewed the grandeur of the cloud and the effect of the scenery, and listened to the long peals of thunder that rolled through the air. The boat having reached the lawn before the monastery, the Count sent a servant to announce his arrival and to entreat shelter of the superior, who soon after appeared at the great gate, attended to several monks, while the servant returned with the message expressive at once of hospitality and pride, but of pride disguised in submission. The party immediately disembarked, and having hastily crossed the lawn, for the shore was now heavy, were received at the gate of superior, who, as they entered, stretched forth his hand and gave his blessings, and they passed into great hall, where the lady abbess waited, attended by several nuns, clothed like herself in black and veiled in white. The veil of the abbess was, however, thrown half back, and discovered a countenance whose chaste dignity was sweetened by the smile of welcome with which she addressed the countess, who she led, with Beleng and Madamos Burn, into the convent parlour, while the Count and Henry were conducted by the superior to the refectory. The Count's servants were now seen running to and fro on the rocks, some venturing almost to the point of the cage, and bending over, held out their touches fastened to long poles, while others, whose steps could be traced only when the course of the light descended to steep and dangerous path that wound to the margin of the sea, and with loud halloos hailed the mariners, whose shrill whistle and then feeble voices were heard at interval mingling with the storm. Sudden shout from the people on the rock increased the anxiety of Melange to an almost intolerable degree. But her suspense concerning the fate of the mariners was soon over, when Henry, running breathless into the room, told that the vessel was anchored in the bay below, but in so shattered a condition that it was feared she would part before the crew could disembark. The Count immediately gave order for his own boat to assist in bringing them to shore, and that such of this unfortunate stranger as could not be accompanied in the adjustment hamlet should be entertained to at the chateau along the latter, where Emily St. Aubert, Monsieur Dupont, Ludovico, and Antony, who having embarked at Leghorn and reached Marseilles, were from hence crossing the Gulf of Lans, when this storm overtook them. They were received by the Count with his usual benignity, who thou, Emily, wished to have proceeded immediately to the monster of St. Clara, would not allow her to leave the chateau that night, and indeed the terror and vertigo she had suffered would scarcely have permitted her to go further. Antony, meanwhile, in the servants' hall, was telling of all the dangers she had encountered and congratulating herself so heartily upon her own and Landoco's escape and on her present comforts, that she often made all that part of the chattering with merriment and laughter. Ludovico's spirit were as gay as her own, but he had discretion enough to restrain them, the tired to check her, though in vain, till her laughter at length ascended to the lady's chamber, who sent to inquire what occupied so much earlier in the chateau and to commend silence. Emily withdrew early to seek the repose she so much required, but her pillow was long a sleepless one. On this her return to her native country, many interesting remembrances were awakened. All the events and sufferings she had experienced since she quitted it came in long succession in her fancy and with were chased only by the image of Valancourt, with whom to believe herself once more in the same land, after they had been so long and so distantly separated, gave her emotions of indescribable joy, but which afterward yielded the anxiety and appreciation when she considered the long period that had elapsed since any letter had passed between them, and how much might have happened in this interval of to affect her future peace. But the thought that Valancourt might be now no more, or if living might have forgotten her, was so very terrible to her heart that she would scarcely suffer herself to pause upon the possibility. She determined to inform him on the following day of her arrival in France, which it was scarcely possible he could know but by the letter from herself, and after soothing her spirit and the hope of soon hearing that he was well and unchanged in his affection, she at length sunk to response.